24 hours after it was reported that the Canucks would likely be moving on from Nikita Zadorov, we have multiple optimistic updates that could indicate that they might re-sign him by the end of the weekend. And the Canucks are still expressing interest in Brandon Duhaime after previously pursuing him ahead of last season's trade deadline. We'll be breaking all of that down in this episode of Canucks Digest, but first make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you don't miss any and all updates surrounding the Canucks this offseason and free agency. And with that, let's hop into the first topic of the day, which is flip-flopping Zadorov updates. And we see here per Elliot Friedman that we're going to know what's going to happen with Zadorov in the next few days. Someone reached out to him and said it's not over yet. And Rick Dhaliwal followed up reporting that the Canucks are making their final offer to Zadorov this weekend. The desire to get this done by Zadorov and his agent is massive. He doesn't want to go anywhere. And so they are saying that there is potentially a chance that Zadorov is going to stay in Vancouver only 24 hours after we thought that he was going to be leaving, despite saying that he would stay for a lesser amount if it was Vancouver compared to the much higher offer that he was much higher price tag that he was putting on himself to other teams out there. He's made it clear that he does want to stay in Vancouver as long as they can match his reasonable discounted number compared to his normal number that he's asking on the free agency market. And we thought that Vancouver wasn't even close to making that number happen and getting it done when we thought that he was potentially going to walk along with Elias Lindholm. However, with this, it does bring some optimism whether they are going to bring him back next season, because we already are expecting Elias Lindholm to be leaving. And like we said, Nikita Zadorov is a much better chemistry guy for this team than Lindholm is, so you can afford to let him go. And if they can keep Zadorov, that will be huge. And when we thought that all hope was lost at re-signing him, we get this right before the weekend. I think it's going to be a very interesting weekend. We'll be breaking down everything as it all unfolds, so stay tuned for that. We've been excited to see how this all shakes out as soon as the season ended, where they were addressing his contract right off the bat. And it's understandable. He was one of the biggest names on their UFAs that they had to bring back or have to bring back next season. And I think this makes it more optimistic that they might be able to get it done. But it does make me worried as far as who else do you have to get rid of to make this happen. We know Dakota Joshua, Tyler Myers, as well as some other names are out there as far as ones to be re-signed. And there's some other trades or signings that they want to make happen with some other players. We've thrown Jake Gensel out there that they might be expressing interest in him and how he would be a great fit for Vancouver. So there is other things that they are going to have to go to make it happen for this team to make a better playoff run next season. However, I think getting Zadorov is going to be a big piece towards making that happen. And they might not have to go and get a guy like Brendan Dillon, who's a bit older. But either way, I would love to see Dillon come to Vancouver regardless. But if it's whether it's playing with Zadorov or not. However, I think no one is upset if Zadorov can stay as long as it's not tanking our cap space and we're not throwing too much money into him. I think it's a great move by Vancouver overall and a great step in the right direction towards putting fans' stresses at ease. I know everyone is very anxious because July 1st hasn't even hit yet, and we're already on edge as far as who Vancouver is going to bring back, who they're going to let walk, what trades they're going to try and make happen before the draft or even on draft night. I know July 1st and June 28th are ones that we're very, very anxious for to see what's going to go down. But for everything related to the Canucks, make sure to stay tuned to Canucks Digest. And without hopping to the second topic of the day, which is Dolly dancing around Duhaime. And Rick Dhaliwal had a busy day saying the Canucks had big interest in Minnesota Wild forward Brandon Duhaime at the trade deadline. I'm told today that the interest has not gone away. He would be a great fit in the fourth line, kills penalty, has great energy, he's tough, sticks up for teammates, he can fight. Keep an eye on Duhaime and the Canucks if he hits July 1st. And when you look at his stats, he combined for 13 points, 5 goals, 8 assists in 80 games last year, split between the Wild and the Avalanche. He went on to add 1 goal in 11 postseason games, so he won't be providing any offense too much, and you don't need him to, really. He's great on the penalty killer. He's not afraid to hit. He's got 208 combined hits in the past season, so he is a bigger physical guy. He's not too experienced. He only has a few seasons under his belt, and I think he could be on the uprise of his career. He hasn't played less than 50 games in a season, so that really does bode well as far as his health goes and for the long term. And when you look at the long term, his contract isn't asking too much. He's coming off of a 1-year contract that paid him $1.1 million, and his next contract could potentially be a 3-year $5.5 million, with the average being clocking in at $1.8 million a season. That is definitely something the Canucks can be comfortable with affording, especially with the projected loss of Lafferty to free agency. And I think that would be a good move by the Canucks in general here, where if you have to move on from a guy like Lafferty, where if you put him on the fourth line, you get rid of Lafferty, I think he would really fit in well with Pius Suter and Nils Hoglander. I think they would bring in a bit more finesse. I think it would make that line a bit more physical. When the way it's sitting right now, Pius Suter and Nils Hoglander, they have the finesse and the speed. Lafferty is fairly quick. However, he's not really producing much, and he didn't really have that strong of a postseason. So I think that's someone that they are definitely thinking of moving on from. So if you bring him in there, you add a bit more depth to a much needed fourth line, where Vancouver is a team that wants to be focused on depth throughout the entire season and not just in the early part of the season. They were the best team in hockey, arguably, through the first half of the season. And then as the season went on, they kind of had to play keep away from some teams where they weren't able to kind of get it done towards the stretch as far as flashy wins like they were early on. They weren't scoring as fast and as quickly as they were before. However, they were able to get some very hard-fought wins against some teams that they maybe should have been beating the crap out of. That's all in the past now. Tocchet doesn't even want to think about those ones, I'm sure. He's just focused on next season and making sure that they can keep that momentum going all season. And if you bring him in on the fourth line, you will have a better chance at doing that, especially when they were thinking of moving Ilya Mikheyev. You bring in Jake Gensel, you have a stellar first line, or you can either interchange between the first and second line. You can move some pieces around. You move on from Elias Lindholm. You bring in a new center as well. And I think with the defensive core potentially not changing too much, it will hold it down a bit more for Vancouver in that aspect. So I think this would be a really good move for Vancouver in general. I think Duhaime is somebody that he is very young. Like we said, he is only 27 years old. He is from Coral Springs, Florida. So it is another American for this team, where we're wanting some more Canadians and all that to be our representative of our team as Canada's team eventually. But we got to make it happen with no matter what. There's going to be guys floating around all over. It's not a matter of where they're from. It's a matter of how they can produce on the ice. And I think he is somebody who can produce, and he can set the tone in some games. With Dakota, if you bring back Dakota Joshua, if you have two physical wingers like that, as well as a physical defense, that would be huge for Vancouver, because Joshua finished in the top 10 in hits, especially if you bring in Brendan Dillon. This could be a very different looking Vancouver team in a much physical sense. We saw Petey get more physical in the playoffs as well. This could be a whole new identity for Vancouver heading into next season, as well as the depth and the goal production with JT Miller and Quinn Hughes each putting up 100-point seasons and continuing to build off of that. I think Vancouver has a lot to look forward to should they be able to get these done and bring back Zadorov. I think that bodes well as far as forming a different kind of identity for Vancouver that we saw. They got outplayed by Edmonton in that sense because they weren't fast enough. They were physical, but they weren't hitting hard enough. We're seeing how Edmonton has running into a brick wall right now with Florida. So if Vancouver can beef up this team like they would do with these additions and re-signings, I think that is going to be very interesting to see for Vancouver going forward. So maybe we can be the bulliers of the Oilers in the postseason and not just in the regular season. We'll bully them all year and anyone who tries to get in our way. And I think that'll be a great way to be just a bull in a china shop heading into the Western Conference next season. And with that, let's hop into comment of the day. Now, this commenter is saying that trade Mikheyev for a bag of pucks, if that's what it takes. Might have been better to trade him to Calgary instead of Kuzmenko. And it might have been a better move to move on from him instead of Kuzmenko. We're seeing how it ended up in the long term. Again, hindsight is 2020. It's easy to make those claims when we're sitting here so many months later and the production just wasn't there. However, I think it would be, if you can definitely get more from Mikheyev than that. It's not necessarily a desperate move in that sense. However, I do think he is someone that the Canucks will need to move on from to free up cap space and to add more depth to this team in that position. So I think it would be a good move by Vancouver to do that. However, I don't think it's entirely deserving of that harsh, but it would have been interesting to see had they had Kuzmenko for the rest of the year. He did produce pretty decently in Calgary, so had he stayed in Vancouver, maybe he would have had a resurgence. Who knows? That's all in the past. Again, like I said earlier, all we can do is look forward to the future. And for anything in the future, make sure to stay tuned for Canucks Digest. That's going to do it for this episode. I've been your host, Griffen.